If you haven't already heard of the Calamity mod for Terraria, then you must have been sleeping under a rock, or you enjoy the vanilla game a little too much, which I don't judge you for, since I also do enjoy the vanilla game to a certain extent, although this mod adds a lot more on top of that, and even more on top of that. That's saying something. There's a lot more content, a lot more bosses, a lot more weapons that go through. And more specifically, I'm referring to the whole new class they've introduced, the Rogue class. And this Rogue class has a stealth meter that charges up over time while you're not attacking, and faster when you're standing still. And attacking with this full stealth meter gives you bonus effects to your rogue weapon, which otherwise do not exist. And did I mention that it also provides like a huge damage thrower on top of that? So basically, when your stealth meter fills up, you'll notice that the weapon tooltip damage also ramps up. And this bonus is actually quite significant, since you'll find that waiting for those stealth strikes, you'll end up doing more damage rather than spamming those rogue weapons. For the most part, it depends on the accessory setup. Not only that, but the rogue class also offers a number of unique defensive and offensive trinkets, / accessories, however you may call them, with effects that include dodging attacks, making your stealth meter charge faster, lifesteal, and many more. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the difficulty I decided to choose for our playthrough. And it ended up being Master Mode, which is the most difficult mode in the base game. And then Death Mode on top of that, which is the most difficult mode for Calamity. And Death Mode is just an add-on to Revengeance. But let's talk about what Master Mode does first. Master Mode, it's extra mode but on crack. So all the enemies have like double their health, double their damage. And Revengeance mode also increases their health by like 20% and damage by a certain percentage as well. And then Death mode just pushes it over the top and gives every enemy and boss like crack cocaine. Alright? Let's just put it simply as that. On top of all that, they've received increased knockback resistance. The players received like light blindness the lower you go down in the world. So if you're like mining, you're practically blind half the time. And all the debuffs inflicted on you deal 50% more damage and last like 3 times longer than they usually do in the base game. All that is just, you know, it's just small things you don't really notice for the most part. But what you will notice are these 2 new bars that the Calamity mod introduces. The Rage Bar and the Adrenaline Bar. The Rage Bar, you're like in a boss fight and you're like near the boss and you're like in combat, in quotes, in combat, you'll passively generate rage. And when you pop that rage bar, you'll receive a 35% damage increase for like 8 seconds or something. And then the adrenaline bar is sort of the same, except you can't take damage. Because if you take damage, it completely resets your adrenaline. And then, yeah, you have to wait the 30 seconds before the bar fully charges. But when it does fully charge, you can pop in and receive like a 200% damage increase for 5 seconds. Which is really good because all the bosses in the Calamity mod get very difficult as their health depletes. So if you save up adrenaline bar, you can easily pop it before it gets too difficult. And of course, you have the stealth bar. We can't forget about the stealth bar. So yeah, that makes the game extremely like inconvenient. I wouldn't say impossible, just inconvenient. And overall, it just forces you to learn the boss mechanics really well and play much better than you would have otherwise. Honestly, I think it makes the mod more interesting to play and more interesting to watch. Yeah, just overall a more fun and challenging experience. So our playthrough begins like any other Terraria playthrough.
Nice.
Gather resources, loot chests, and above all else, create efficient NPC housing. While NPC happiness is a very innovative and cool mechanic introduced in Terraria 1.4, it makes housing very tedious compared to what you could do before, which is stick everybody into like a single wood room tall apartment. Mind you, I still did that, right? Minimum amount of space required for my NPCs, just enough so they'll consider settling down and providing me their services, before realizing that they've imprisoned themselves in a tiny wood cell. But hey, if you ask any of them, they'll tell you that they love it there and really enjoy the company of their cellmates. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I mean their neighbors. Alright. So, Cactus. In the beginning, there was cactus armor, cactus weapons, and some wolfram weapons here and there as well. Wolfram stuff is like these flying drones that you would see in the overworld of the Calamity mod. They litter the skies and the ground, and just provide you some early game materials to craft weapons with, or armor. And this is what I use to poke and prod my way over to the various surface level chests, and finally over to the snow biome. And why the snow biome, you may ask? Well, you know, there's the usual blizzard in a bottle, flurry boots in the underground snow biome, but also it's for our first pre-boss armor set, the Snow Ruffian armor. This armor provides us with the rogue stealth bar. Spoiler alert, I'm actually not going to be using stealth strikes until like later on, since I didn't realize how strong they were until that point, but for now, let's just pretend we're actually going to use it. So it provides a stealth bar and basically negates all fall damage with the glide function. Amazing, I know. Gliding? Wow, very cool. Now, the only issue is you need to find Snowflink's fur, and let me tell you, these round fluffy bastards are tough early game. They have a large amount of health, are kind of rare so you won't see them very often, and if you ever get within kissing distance with one, you'll, kiss your ass goodbye, basically. They'll tear you apart. Well, out of the way, let's talk about the types of weapons you might use against the first bosses. I decided to go with the Gleaming Dagger because it was easy to get and surprisingly effective. And then, if you really want to be efficient, you would have used the Crystalline, which needs more rare materials but will have better damage and better area coverage. I unfortunately could not spare the material, specifically the diamonds in the recipe for the Crystalline, so I went ahead and settled with the Gleaming Dagger. Now, both those diamonds I could not spare. It is actually quite hard to find diamonds, at least I felt for me, in the early game, because I don't really go down that deep when I mine, and I'm not sure if they appear after a certain depth or not. Please fact check me, correct me if I'm wrong, all that yada yada yada. But yeah, they're actually needed for both the storage and crafting heart of the magic storage mod, which is another mod that I'm utilizing in this modded playthrough. If you haven't checked out the Magic Storage mod before, I would highly recommend you go check it out for your next modded playthrough. Basically, it compacts all the chests and crafting stations you would ever need throughout the game into one localized room. And yeah, it also organizes everything for you, so no more naming and going through 15 different chests. By this time, I acquired a hook, which helps me explore those huge caverns and the aforementioned items from earlier. No chests, such as the flurry boots and then the blizzard in the bottle. And enough life crystals to cap out my health at the soft cap of 400 in the early game. And I was able to do that through a combination of just finding heart crystals underground and raiding planetoids in the solar system biome. Sorry, I mean the space biome. And yeah, basically Calamity mod added these planetoids that are filled with one heart crystal, guaranteed, and they are surrounded by like a certain type of gemstone. Very rarely diamonds, and unfortunately I didn't find any, so here we are. And earlier I also managed to defeat the goblin army. It actually appeared quite early, so I was able to stang myself a pair of rocket boots, combine it into specter boots, and then a white horseshoe and a balloon. And then we're also using the Scuttler's Drool, which is kind of useless because, as I said, I didn't really start using stealth strikes until later on into the run. Anyways, and after all that, I managed to set up the magic storage as well, which is basically done for the rest of the playthrough. God bless, I don't have to deal with that whole mess ever again. Now we're right on the cusp of our first boss, and I managed to get lucky enough to find one of the very few rare shrines in the world that provide a non-craftable but pretty powerful accessory for the early game. I found myself the Luxor's Gift, which provided different projectiles based on the type of weapon you're using. So you can see that the rogue weapon I'm using right now also spits out purple scorpions that bounce around. They don't do very much damage, but they do some. It's good enough for me. And we also have the Trinket of Chi, which provides a flat 2 life regen and some damage reduction if you haven't been hit in a while. The first boss we're tackling is the Desert Scourge, one of the many, and I mean many, worm-type enemies found in the Calamity mod. Not really sure why worm types are so popular. And also, it was one of the easiest worm bosses. Of course. Arena setup was just a screen-long platform, maybe 8 to 12 blocks off the ground, with some campfires and heart lanterns for health regen. And a boss statue which provides a hefty 5 defense while in its vicinity. For player buffs, I just used what I had handy, which was in this case a medium well-fed buff, which provides a medium amount of buffs to all stats, and an Iron Skin potion, which provides the player with 8 defense. So the boss fight itself. The summon item required for the boss is the Desert Medallion, which could be found in the underground desert or crafted. I luckily found it in the underground desert, which saved me the trouble of getting all the crafting material. The actual fight itself is pretty simple. I felt that I may have been a tad over prepared even. Basically, watch out for projectiles it spits out and keep an wary eye on your minimap to dodge its minions and deadly charges. Not saying that it wasn't a threat, because if it did touch me, it hit like an actual truck. I'm talking like almost a quarter of my HP sometimes. Now, you may have noticed that I have not been utilizing stealth strikes too much, in fact, not at all. And that is because I was blissfully unaware of how powerful they turned out to be. But please forgive me for just spamming my gold dagger on the boss. Alright, with the Desert Scourge buried beneath thousands of layers of sand, we can gain access to a new set of weapons and armor. I went ahead and crafted myself a set of Victide Rogue armor from the sea remains we crafted, which required 2 each of coral, starfish, seashells, and pearl shards, which dropped from the Desert Scourge, which gives us the bonus of having a 10% chance of throwing a returning seashell projectile, technically giving us a small DPS increase. And the set itself also gives you big buffs when you're submerged in water. I also crafted myself the fish boomerang, which turned out to be not so good. I'm sorry, fish boomerang, but you gotta go. So I just ended up using the Gilded Dagger for our next boss. After arming myself with a bunch of dead sea creatures, I went out to dig myself a hole in the middle of the desert to the underground ocean, in which we mined some maybe important looking sea prisms and finally found the elusive giant clam. The fight itself was nothing to write home about. The only buffs I had were from the Victide armor and the fruit I ate earlier for a small well-fed buff. Dodge the slams and the small clams, and soon enough we turned it into the summary item you might find in a coastal gift shop. No, I mean seriously, look at this gold statue I just got off of it. Pretty shiny, pretty cool. Aftermath is that we unlock this very cool NPC that sells you mediocre rogue items and tells you 4. Exciting, I know. Oh, and he also takes up another spot for NPC housing, so my sanity dwindles yet again trying to balance the NPC happiness and the collapsing housing situation, just like life. We won't be interacting with the King of the Ocean very much, since again, he doesn't sell to anything too worthwhile. In between all of that, I also dug up a bunch of desert fossils, which I forced through my extractinator in hopes of acquiring a few diamonds so I could finally craft the crystalline before the Eye of the Cthulhu fight. And yeah, I did manage to get it.